Welcome to the Sharkpreneur podcast with Kevin Harrington and Seth Greene. Kevin Harrington is the inventor of the infomercial, one of the original sharks from the hit TV show Shark Tank, and has generated over $5 billion in TV and digital direct response sales. Seth Greene is the world's first trusted authority on cutting-edge direct response marketing, a best-selling author, and the only 3-time Marketer of the Year nominee. On the podcast, Kevin and Seth interview sharkpreneurs who share straight talk on what it takes to explode your business.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.
Today on Sharkpreneur, this is Carl McKinney, co-hosting with Seth Greene and Kevin Harrington. We have Joshua Tynes.
Close. Tennis.
Which one? Tennis. I knew that. I was just checking to see that, that you we have Joshua Tennis here.
Yeah,
and,
all good.
We are going to have a great and exciting conversation about his journey to founding Subtle Spirits. So tell us a little bit about that journey and how your passion for creating influenced your transition.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for having me. So I've started Subtle Spirits about 3.5 years ago, and I really kind of began my wine and spirits journey roughly 15 years ago. I'm from the Midwest, and after I graduated college, I kind of stayed behind in Columbia, Missouri. I'm a musician, and so I was kind of working jobs, playing gigs, saving my money. I knew I had wanted to move out to the West Coast, to San Francisco, and so I kind of spent an extra year getting my stuff together to do that. And shortly after moving out here to San Francisco in 2008, I ended up working for a little wine store, little bottle shop in this neighborhood of Noe Valley, and it was a fast trajectory after that. I started there part-time, stocking boxes, and after 11 years was managing 4 of the different businesses for the group that I worked for, and managing their spirits program. And that's kind of what took me into wine at first. So I spent the first kind of half of that learning intensely about wine, and kind of was lucky to have mentors who showed me that world and brought me in under their wing to learn as much as I could about it. And from there, discovered spirits. And after my first trip to Scotland, after that trip, it was kind of all in after that. I had gone to about 16, 17 distilleries on that first trip, and probably another 30 more on subsequent trips. And eventually made it to Kentucky, started buying single casks of bourbon and rye and scotch for the stores that I was running. And we would bottle that for just our business and put a little logo on it, and kind of got known for doing that. And it was right around that time when I had that kind of aha moment of knowing that I wanted to move into doing my own brand. And it took me another few years to kind of line up all the pieces to get that done. And that was roughly 3.5, 4 years ago when I jumped ship and went on my own.
Cool. Hey, you mentioned it was a fast trajectory, and I don't believe in luck. I believe that the thing that people call luck is when preparedness meets opportunity. So that fast trajectory says a lot about you. You were prepared, the opportunity presented itself, and here we are today. You're on the Sharkpreneur podcast. Tell me, what about your career in music? Did that kind of play a part in your career choice?
Yeah, I think I've always been a creative. I've always kind of dabbled in different mediums of art, whether it be kind of like painting or music for the last 30 years or so. And I think that's influenced me beyond in also the business world, in the way that I kind of don't always see the box or the lines to color in, but kind of being creative enough to think outside of that box or color outside of those lines. And so I think I credit a lot of that kind of creative side to myself, my personality, which has helped me grow in the business world. And that was also a way how I was able to grow in that former kind of, we'll call it corporate side, working for another hospitality group. and moving into what for me is not just a business, but a kind of way to creatively express and bring other artists into people's worlds and show that side of myself as well. And so it's really been a mission of mine to blend both those together.
And you mentioned falling in love with wine first. Could you share a memorable wine experience or a particular wine that sparked your interest in the world of wine?
Yeah, absolutely. There were kind of two. Wine taught me about memory and kind of linking your flavor memory and into being able to articulate what you are experiencing with a certain like wine or spirit. And so in the journey of going through my education about wine, I was able to kind of sharpen my ability to identify that flavor memory, whether it be in a wine or a whiskey, and articulate that to people. And that's kind of the hurdle that a lot of people get a little caught up in. One of the first experiences I remember was one of my colleagues at the time was Italian. And so there were all these Italians in there tasting us on a bunch of different wines that they imported and were wanting to get into our store. And I didn't speak Italian. I was kind of, nodding along and seeing what I could pick up on and everything. And, my colleague would always kind of pause for a second and like translate for me. And so we were tasting this one wine, and I had this vivid memory of growing up when in my backyard in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we had this really tall tree, and now I'm forgetting the berry. It was a mulberry tree. And I have this memory of these things because they would fall over the ground and get on our feet when we were playing in the backyard, and so the smell of mulberries. And so I said,
Right.
oh, this really smells like mulberries. And the group of Italians that were right there kind of looked at me like, you speak Italian? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? And they pointed out on the back of the label that the name for this wine was mulberry, or the reference to this vineyard they kind of called the mulberry vineyard or whatever. And anyway, they were impressed, and I was kind of stunned that I was able to connect that memory from way back in the day into something that I was tasting. And that was kind of one of many early experiences where I just realized that there's not necessarily a right answer to this, but if you can link up how you remember and how you learned to taste, and that goes well beyond wine, but just food, or these kind of visual experiences that you have from growing up, linking all that is kind of what made me be able to take the next step into articulating, into blending, into being able to kind of be the shaman for people to find what they like and help them further their experience.
Okay. I want to move on and talk about the bourbon and rye kind of side of you. Can you describe the process of selecting single casks of bourbon and rye? Rye? I can't speak English today. Yeah, can you describe
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
process?
Yeah, so it started with really, going directly to Kentucky and picking out these casks from the warehouse. When I started this was, 11, 12 years ago, where the market for bourbon and rye was not quite as on fire as it is right now. And so the accessibility to be getting these experiences to go directly to the distillery were a little easier. Nowadays, that's really, really difficult. And there's a waiting list and a line and an allocation and all that kind of stuff. But really, as kind of cool as it sounds, we'd go to the distillery and we'd go in the warehouse. They call it the rick house, where they're aging all the casks of, whether it be bourbon or rye. And we would take, samples right out of the barrels and sample them from cask and decide which one we liked the best. And that was the one that we would kind of take back with us, so to speak, where they would put our logo on it for the group and bottle it. And I got really good and comfortable kind of channeling my wine tasting days, where I'd go to these events in downtown San Francisco, and all the importers would come and you taste, 250 wines in a 3-hour period, knowing how to control yourself and, spit and really keep an intellectual approach to how you're going about doing that was a good kind of foundation to diving into the other side of it when it came to barrels, because obviously barrels of whiskey being higher proof than wine, you got to kind of pace yourself in a way that you can make it through a lineup, right, of higher proof spirits and still know what you're going for, what you're tasting, what you're trying to find, and ultimately what you're going to buy. And so that, again, that wine foundation kind of helped influence that. And then after doing that, 3, 5, 10, 15 times, got really comfortable at just picking what I like and never really trying to pick for a certain person's palate other than my own. And that was a big kind of marker. I remember making that commitment to myself of saying, I'm just going to pick what I like, what I can describe, what brings me, the vibe that I'm looking for, the experience, the joy. And if I can do that, and people like that, then great. And fast forward, to a good 5-6 years of doing that and close to, 1,000+ casks being sampled. That's what led me to here.
And you mentioned, what you're looking for. Are there specific elements or flavors or tastes, or can you describe for my audience what it is that you're looking for?
Yeah. So, some people who are listening might have heard some of the brands call it, say, Wild Turkey, Buffalo Trace, Four Roses, to name just a few. And so when you're able to taste from these different brands many, many times over, you get to have a good idea of what it's supposed to taste like, what the standard tastes like, right? So if you were to travel all around the world, a bottle of Johnny Walker Black should taste the same in Singapore versus Hawaii versus New York. And the same goes for American distilleries as well. That house style that they blend or make at scale is, what a consumer expects. And so what I began to realize is I was really good at focusing on deviations or differences in the cast that we were going for. And so there might be a very little variance and a lot of subtlety between, a lineup of 10 casks, but the ones that I was always going for were something that kind of were different and offered something maybe a little bit more amplified than just the standard style. So if bourbon flavor notes, you get a lot of caramel, you get a lot of vanilla, you get a little bit of spice. I was always looking for something that had an amplified kind of combination of those things that was off the normal beaten path. And some people call those honey barrels, some people call those unicorn barrels. That doesn't mean they're better or worse. They're just kind of different on that bell curve, if you will. And once I figured out how to really find those types, I just kept on doing it.
Cool. Now, is that discerning palate genetic, or is it a learned skill?
I think that's a good question. I think there's probably a combination of both. Genetically across, the human population, females have, statistically time and again proven to be better tasters. There's what's called a super taster, and it means like your sense of taste and smell is really heightened. Women go through this before and during and after pregnancy. It's affected by hormones. Right. And there is, a part of the population that, male as well, that will have these kind of heightened abilities. So my suspicion is that some of that is genetic and inherited. And then just like anything, the balance of nature versus nurture is kind of prevalent in a lot of aspects of who we are and what we become. So you can have a predisposition to some sort of health issue that you can, I believe, can combat with, an environmental influence that you bring upon yourself, whether it's diet or things like that. And so the same goes for tasting. I think preparation and studying and repetition, committing those things to memory can kind of give you the extra knowledge that you need to do that. And so it's kind of a combination, I think, for a lot of people. Some have more of one than the other.
And I know, Joshua, some of my audience has been approached to invest, and I guess single casks, and most of it comes from Europe. They get a phone call, they're sent the paperwork, and I've heard chatter about it. Is there any advice you could give kind of a neophyte on what they should look for in those types of investments?
First advice is this is not financial advice.
There's a disclaimer. We're not holding you to it.
Yeah.
Just curious, your experiences.
Yeah. I'll say a few things about that. One, I think, in general, one should probably not invest in something that they don't know of. I think I personally have invested very heavily in whiskey beyond just this brand, but as an alternative asset class, because I really believe in the viability of that asset class. Um, I think that alternative assets, like luxury goods, like whiskey, kind of overlapping into that, have proven over history to be a pretty high returning class, and so the opportunity is certainly there. It's just kind of when it gets bifurcated into a faraway land, whether it be some person that you've never met before on the phone from Europe, that's when things can get a little murky and cloudy. But in general, the whiskey class itself as an alternative asset class has performed exceedingly well against other things like the S&P 500 and real estate and stuff like that. And, for me, I think the number one thing is invest in what you know. But if you are curious, there are groups out there of educated people who have been in that industry or in that kind of sector that you can get curious and read more about. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10 to 15 years, we actually saw larger financial institutions that were, regulated and wrapped into a larger kind of institution where you might be able to gain access to alternative exposure like this class of whiskey, so to speak, with your standard wealth management firm, whether that be a large, JP Morgan, Fidelity, whatever. I do think that in general has been trending that way. And a lot of private equity money has rolled in to this sector because there is kind of a liquidity vacuum for small producers like me who are, self-invested, don't have any other investors, and have bootstrapped, one barrel into 2 into 4 into 8 into 25 into more, need access to capital. And so institutional investors and financiers have stepped in to fill that void. So I would say that the future is pretty bright for that, if you ask me.
No, the United States has that, if I get it wrong, help me out here, the 3-tier system where you have to go to a distributor goes to the store. What's the challenge for you, being a smaller distributor, a smaller producer?
And the challenge is that system isn't the same in every state. First of all, there's probably about 30 plus states that are 3-tier states. And then there's what you have control states where there isn't really a middle tier. It's like the state acts as the middle man. And then there are states that kind of
like ABC that have ABC stores. Is that like a
correct?
Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And then and there are other states that have like a hybrid model of that where, a bar can buy from a retailer legally. And then there are even new laws that are passing in states like the District of Columbia and Kentucky, where they have these vintage spirits laws where you can buy directly from consumers and still sell in your bar or retail spot. So this landscape is just really changing. The whole compliance issue is always going to be a really thickly layered barrier of entry for this industry. So, navigating that is a disproportionate part of my job that I don't really electively love doing. And so it's kind of like part of the thing when you want to scale, you want to be able to find someone who can like offload the work that takes you away from what you really love doing. Compliance is not something I'm passionate about. But that said, I elected to self-distribute in the state of California because it eliminated the need for a middleman. It kind of allowed me to take that resource and roll it back into the business for growth. And then in exchange, I just have to have like a contractual relationship with a producer who, will allow me to create in that first tier, that first leg of the distribution channel. And so that's been a way for me to take ownership of my product and go out in the state of California and sell it to as many places and develop that relationship. And once you get into other states and you have to mitigate all those different kind of tiers in that system, it gets a little bit more complicated as you want to still remain connected to your end consumer, but have the access to the larger distribution network. And so that's going to be a problem, really at any scale.
Gotcha. And, pardon my ignorance, I've, did some perfunctory research a little bit. And I saw that.
Yeah, these are great questions. Yeah.
I saw that another, the Uncle Nearest brand that she mentioned that 3-tier thing was a challenge for some of the smaller distributors because the big guys box you out, sort of. I thought, wow, I got to ask Joshua about that. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And that's good. Like I said, that's the continuous problem of a small brand, is how to get that distribution without kind of selling out control of what you're trying to do.
and I also read that you have a passion for immersing yourself fully in the experience. Um,
Yeah.
tell me how tell me how that helps you grow. Tell me how that helps. I'm looking at some of that artwork and the good stuff. And
Yeah.
what about that? Tell me about your passion, though, the good stuff.
Yeah, so our whole thing, we're what you call an independent bottler, which means we're not a distillery, but we source spirits from distilleries and then we bottle those. I either blend them or I'll bottle them as single casks. And that is confusing to some, but it's actually a pretty common way of doing business in the spirits industry. This model has been around for 300 plus years. It's less common in America, and so to try to convey that to an American consumer, that what that is going to be a challenge. Being that I had the retail experience, seeing all these new brands get created and then pitched to me on that side of the counter, I had kind of a front row seat at watching people go out and do that. And so when I decided to do that for myself, I wanted to be a lot different and channel really who I am through the product. And I don't have a history of distilling. I don't have a family that was in that industry for 100 years. So there's no ancient story about my great grandfather starting the first distillery in such and such a place. And, it's hard to manufacture a brand identity and story. A lot of people try to do it, and some of it takes off and some of it doesn't. So the way for us to be as authentic as possible was to just kind of tell the story of who we are and who we are as artists. My wife is my partner, and she's also an artist and a designer. And so that was our way of channeling who we are and showing people what we do. And so each of our releases has an original painting or mixed media piece of work that we commission with an artist directly. We don't buy this off the wall existing. We have it created and commissioned from scratch. And we work with the artist in kind of more of an improvisational musical way to bring out the idea that we might be intrigued by, and bounce that back with them and try to come up with something really cool and unique. And so if you go to our website, you see all these different pieces. That's a product of that. And we try to come up with, a unique title or something that befits the artwork or befits of what's going on with our world in time. So they kind of have more of a individual identity, much like a music, record or a song. And that's how we approach putting all this stuff out. And it's been a way for us to be authentic and tell our story. And if that resonates with people, that's great.
Yeah, I love some of the artwork that I've seen here on the site. It's kind of cool. Okay, now I'm going to
Yeah.
pick your brain a little bit about some favorites. You've traveled the world, wineries, distilleries all over the world. Tell me a few of your favorite wineries and distilleries, and what made them your favorites.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with wine, because that was the first part of the journey. California, called Hansel Winery. It was one of the first places that I kind of went to when I was starting off and didn't really know very much. And I had a customer come into the store who bought some of this wine, and they seemed like they knew what they were talking about. And so I was just intrigued. I dove right in, and I ended up buying a stack of cases for the store before I even really had the authority to do anything as a as a buyer or anything. And I fell in love with the wine, and since then joined their wine club, and I've been in that since 2009. And so I've got a collection vertical of all their Pinots and Chards. They make Grand Cru level Pinot and Chardonnay from California. And it's been a part, again, like this memory, this linked story for me of how I got to where I am. And that's kind of just as important to me as what's in the bottle. So that's definitely a favorite winery. Favorite distillery, at first it was Glenrothes in Scotland. That was kind of the first thing that got me into Scotch whiskey, that and Lagavulin, kind of on the smokier side. After visiting those places, I was hooked, and I still have a lot of different bottles of older, stuff of that you can get. And then from America, one of my other favorite distilleries is Willett Distillery. The family owned and operated still after all these years. And, Drew Colsveen is a good friend of mine. And there's just so many cool things that they're able to do, even at their larger, but still kind of small scale, that I really look up to. And having known people in the industry like him for now over 10 years, it's kind of in some ways kind of someone who I look to emulate in how I go about creating what I'm doing. And the whiskey's pretty darn good too.
All right. It's always a bonus with that, huh? So,
Yeah.
listen, what can customers expect when they explore the offerings from Subtle Spirits, and how does your unique background contribute to the selection of the products?
Yeah, I think what you can expect is to be to kind of be confronted with something a little different each time, the unexpected, if you will. The uniqueness is what we're going for. We're not looking for everything to taste the same or for everything to be the same. We try to create things that, have a unique one-off kind of vibe to them. And so if you can kind of follow along with what we do and read the blog posts that we put and check out the information that we put on each release, it'll tell you more of that story and more of that flavor profile and why it came about. And so we really are trying to kind of, as we grow from a really small niche producer, find that way of expressing to a little bit of a broader audience and bringing people in from the art world and the spirits world and the wine world and the food world and the music world, and create some kind of synesthesia experience between the visual and the flavor and all that rolled in together. And so, I think in some ways, expecting the unexpected from us is what we are trying to, be known for.
That is super cool. Can you tell my audience how to reach you and how to order and all the other good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to our website, subtlespirits.com, SUBTLE spirits, SPIRITS, there's a little find us tab on the website where you can see all the locations that were to be found. Most of them are in California, but there is a shipper out of DC called Sealbox, which can ship to pretty much everywhere in the country. And so that's kind of the best place probably for a wider audience like this to find us, is at sealbox.com. And then I'd encourage you to go to the website, and at the bottom of the website, you can scroll and join our mailing list. And I promise we don't send out a bunch of superfluous emails. It's actually kind of based on the releases that we have going on. And we do pop-up events in different cities as well, and galleries. And so we look forward to interacting with as many of you as we can. And if you do listen to this and you're at one of those, please come up and say hi. We'd love to hear from you.
That's cool. So I'm on the list. So if you guys ever do a pop up in New York or Pennsylvania or Ohio up here in the Northeast, I really hope I get the notification so I can
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell my CEO I need a few days off. Listen,
The day after, probably, yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, in your journey from music to wine and spirits, what skills or qualities do you think that you have that were most transferable or beneficial?
So I have a psychology degree, and in the beginning of that, I thought I would go on to med school and be a psychiatrist, and pretty quickly realized that I didn't want to do that. And so I got really into cognitive psych and kind of rather than the behavioral side, more the cognition and the memory side, and that kind of led me to business. I've always kind of had a knack for business and an understanding of numbers. And so I said earlier in this discussion that I think the creativity helped me figure out a way to integrate these parts of my personality with the more, the type A with the type B. And for me, it's always been kind of like a yin yang balance of my creative self versus my, measured and calculated self, the improv versus the prepared. And that's just me personally. And as I go further down this path, that's kind of what I want to kind of set free, if you will, both those, so that they can kind of balance each other out. And I think as creative and idealistic as people can be, you still have to have ability to execute, and you have to have the drive and wherewithal to make things happen. And so for me, I've had a lot of good business mentors around me who I can go to and ask questions and kind of keep me on the right track when I'm toying with something or struggling with something or celebrating something, and maybe bring me back down to earth. I think business in itself is a really creative pursuit. If you are doing it well and having fun with it, it really can be. And for me, if I'm not having fun with the mechanics and the work of it, then it's just not something that's going to work out for me. And so I guess the answer to that is, blending those kind of both the business side with the creative side has helped me stay this course, and hopefully will continue to.
Now, Joshua, given all your success, what's your biggest challenge now, business-wise?
Business wise, biggest challenge. I think the first thing that comes to mind is this is a very capital intensive business. The asset itself of whiskey is expensive. And so building the market, building the customer base and kind of wrangling it together is going to be a challenge, I think, really at any size or scale. And capital can be too. So I think really for us right now, it's about really me zeroing in on the most efficient use of our capital so that we can feed the engine of growth as best and efficiently as possible. I've gone into personal debt to feed this business because of how much I believe in it. And the management of that as a tool has actually worked out really well for me because I'm, able to manage that interest rate side at a lower, cost than the ability for us to grow and sell. And there are a lot of other great companies like Nike, for example, that have never done an equity sale, but have grown off of debt. And so staying on top of the numbers and really being aware of that is obviously crucial in any successful business. The capital in this one is particularly intense because you really have to have the forecast and the capital to buy whiskey at a younger age and then sit on it. Before we even had a license to sell whiskey, the first thing I bought was barrels of whiskey in Kentucky, a new make for me to come out with. And that was 4 years ago, and I haven't even come out with it yet. So you really have to be financially disciplined and good at managing, the spread of your growth trajectory when it comes to the finance. So I think capital is probably that largest thing. Yeah.
Okay. One question based on what you just said. You have the casks of whiskey that you bought 4 years ago, and you haven't come out yet. When can we expect them to come out?
I think we'll begin dropping those next year. They're just had their 4-year-old birthday, and so obviously we're going to go based on taste and where they're showing. But I've kind of monitored them obviously for the last 4 years and really like where a lot of them are heading. So we'll probably slowly get into those next year, and then we've already acquired some other distillate from other distilleries in Kentucky that's a little older that we'll be able to mix in with that as well. So coming up soon.
And I realize I'm over time, but one more question.
You're good.
When you have those barrels and you bought them all 4 years ago, do they mature at individual paces? One that's not ready next year, maybe ready the next year after that or the year after that. Is that kind of how that process goes?
That's a great question. Yeah. And that is the magic of the whole kind of concept of single barrels, is that you could have these two barrels that were really born the same day, filled into wood the same day, next to each other in the same warehouse, and they just take a different trajectory sometimes. Much like siblings, you have like fraternal twins or even identical twins that for some reason or another their personalities end up a little differently, and that's very similar to how that can be with barrels of whiskey. And so it kind of requires kind of a constant monitoring and checking of where things are going, and to be able to predict that is, you can kind of do it, and then some of it's just magic. And so knowing when to kind of say, okay, this is ready is still a subjective thing. But in general, yeah, there's a lot of variance between things. And, temperature in these warehouses can vary sometimes 30, 40 degrees from the fourth or, 10th floor all the way down to the first floor, the northeast corner on the bottom versus the southwest corner on the top. And so you are really kind of living a different life, especially over a 10-year period. That's, 40 seasons of change. So there is a lot of variance. And so the idea is to get as much as you can so you can kind of get into all the different parts of the bell curve and come up with something great.
Cool. Great. Yeah. Even like me, and I know my audience is certainly going to appreciate your time today. Today, guys, we've had Joshua Thinnes, the founder of Subtle Spirits. His website is subtlespirits.com. And what was the other company in DC where they can find you again?
So sealbox.com, SEELBACHS. If you just Google Sealbox, they'll be able to ship to pretty much every state in the United States. And currently they have our newest release on their website right now. It's called Stellar Bourbon. And it's really delicious. It makes a perfect holiday gift. We were just featured in San Francisco Magazine with this product and the artist Kate Tova. So check it out. And we really appreciate everyone's interest and support.
Super. This has been great. Hey, again, this is Carl McKinney, co-hosting with Seth Greene and Kevin Harrington, the Sharkpreneur podcast, and today's guest, Joshua Thinnis. Joshua, thank you for your time. Audience, we will talk to you the next time.
Why do so many businesses struggle while others seem to explode overnight? Do you wish you had the secret to this type of exponential growth? Now, I've scaled more than 20 businesses to over $100 million, and it's not just luck. In my new book with Mark Tim, Mentor to Millions, you'll learn the repeatable framework I use in all my business ventures for massive success. Order at kevinmentor.com and get over $1,000 in bonuses. Head to kevinmentor.com.